Have you been talking to different types of creatives?
Yeah, different types of people. I've been talking to like art directors. I talked to like with a producer yesterday. Last week in my mentorship class, I talked with like a founder of a shoe brand in Brooklyn that I've worked with before, but he had some like really great insight. And on Friday, I'm speaking with a literary and illustration agent. So
Oh,
that's pretty
cool.
cool, and it's all people that I know personally. So it's been awesome because one, it's a great way to catch up, and two, it's really cool because I feel like I just have all these questions for all my friends, and you
Yeah,
can only ask so much in person. And now I'm kind of like, all right, let's like talk about some stuff, you know. So
cool.
and it's been great to invite people in. You know, the engagement's been awesome. People are asking questions and really interested. So I'm pretty stoked. I'm pretty stoked to just share the creative spirit, I guess.
I'm just gonna plug back in here. Um, and I started out as like an editorial photographer. I went to the University of Michigan. Like many photographers, I got a degree in English language and literature, and I had like a sub concentration in creative writing and poetry. But my thesis was like I had to write a book of poems to graduate. Um, but I always did photo stuff. I was always like interested in photography, and I did an internship when I was in college in Chile. Like I always was interested in Spanish language as well, so I did sort of like minor type stuff in photography and Spanish, and then I had gone to Spain by myself as a high schooler to learn Spanish, and then for my junior year, I decided to go to Chile because the program that I went to had an internship program, and they were like, "You could be a photographer for a national daily newspaper in Chile," and I was like, "Yes, I'm going here."
Oh wow,
and
yeah.
so I did that, and it was definitely like life changing and super important part of my like young life. And then when I came back, like I was still finishing my poetry thesis, but I was like, okay, I'm gonna be a photojournalist, but I wanted to be like Sebastiano Salgado or something. And even when I was at the paper in Chile, like I was just this kid and this girl, and it was a bunch of guys in their 20s and 30s and 40s, and they just called me gringa, and they'd be like, okay, here, gringa, go here, go there. And I would be so stressed out about it because I was like, I wanted to be Sebastiano Salgado, and I was supposed to take a picture of like Frey, who was like the president at the time, and it was like so stressful to like try and be in the right place. But then I was like, how do I make this like world class photojournalism? And I didn't. But so when I came back, I just did like independent study stuff, and then when I graduated, I moved back to California, and I thought I was gonna just like try to be a photojournalist, even though I knew that there was some disconnect with my personal way of shooting. And so I started like stringing for AP and different things like that. Somebody that I knew from college, who's now an English teacher in Maine, um, her brother lived in San Francisco and had worked at the New Lab, which was the big commercial lab in San Francisco at the time. Hey, Annika. And I was like, what do I do? Like, I want to live in San Francisco, and you need to pay a fair amount of rent. At the time, it was like so much less than it is now. But the stringing was not going to cut it. And I was expected, my parents were amazing and able to like totally pay for my college, which I know is like a huge advantage. But the expectation was after college, you take care of yourself, like we're here, but you don't live here, we don't pay your bills, like you find a place to live, you pay your bills. And so like even if I was getting assignments for AP I was making $200 or $300, like what the freelance lifestyle is like, you would wait 60 days, 90 days to get that if you're lucky.
Totally.
um and so I got a job at the New Lab, and that was like, it was 1998, so it was like, I'm telling you how old I am, but it was like ground zero for internet. Like this is the time when Fast Company magazine was literally like 500 pages. Like it was like a book every month. Like
Wow.
it was just like tech, money, like everything was happening in San Francisco. And I had an honors degree in English literature. I just worked as a photojournalist, and I was working at the front counter of a photo lab. And but it was such a great education just to see like what commercial photography was about. I knew nothing about that. I just knew about like the few classes I had taken, and then on the ground, like what it was like to shoot in like a tear gas in Chile or whatever. So I had a lot of like real world stuff, but I had like no commercial stuff. And then when I was working there, like everyone immediately was like, okay, well, you don't want to work here forever, right? So everyone starts assisting. And at the time, that was like a really good gig because this is like pre-digital. Everything is film still.
Yeah.
And so you were just like carrying around lights, setting stuff up, loading film. Oh my God, film. That's a whole topic we could talk about. So you're just like loading film, setting up lights, and you get paid like $200 a day, sometimes a little bit less, sometimes more, but like often it wasn't the whole day. And so I started doing that, and then quickly, then I stopped working at the new lab after like 9 months. And then I was always like trying to shoot when I wasn't assisting and come up with projects for myself. Like I've always been a pretty good self-starter on coming up with projects. I had a friend, Paul Trapani, who now, I don't know what his role is, but he's at, he's like the creative director or something like big at Dolls Kill, which is kind of this random, like huge party clothes thing. He helped Sophia Amorosa, like he was her photo teacher and helped her start, what was her thing before Girl Boss?
I'm not sure. I'm like,
Nasty Gal.
I don't know the who's who.
Oh, so Sophia Amorosa was like a student of Paul's, and he had worked, I met him because he was also from Michigan, living in California, but he was working at a different lab called PhotoWorks, which is still around in San Francisco. And he was kind of like my first photo friend because I would go there to process like my AP film.
Mm-hmm.
And we were like buddies, like, oh, you're from Michigan too. And he was also shooting, but I was shooting a lot for the Guardian, a San Francisco Guardian at the time. He was shooting for SF Weekly. And so like, we would just, talk about photography and stuff like that. So I've always been kind of like a community person, I guess. But yeah, so like Paul and I would like go out and like go wander around and like take pictures. And he like taught me about, what was the Polaroid, like N95 or I can't remember.
Yeah. Yep.
You pull apart and then you make like, got really interested in 4x5. I'm going like all sorts of.
No. So, what this is making me think here is that like, you started, very, very naturally, like in photography, and like, it makes me think though, then you had help and like, everybody, you got to have some sort of helping hand, and you meet so many people in this industry, but then all of a sudden here you are, let's say present day, and like you have these things that you've made yourself. You have a magazine.
I actually didn't get like the only help that I got, the biggest help that I would say that I have had in photography in life is that my parents paid for college, like that is major, because if you are fighting that kind of like student debt and just trying to pay bills in a big city, like that is just a major uphill battle and an advantage that you don't have,
Right.
But then all the rest of it was just like someone suggested that they were working in a lab. And so I worked at a lab. I didn't know anyone. I wasn't connected to anyone. And then my sister connected me to a photographer, Thayer Gowdy, who shot her wedding. And she was like, you should assist my little sister should assist for you, Yeah. But it was nothing like.
Well, when did you strike out on your own? Because like the way that I view you is I'm like, you're like this, like you're this thing. It's like Emily Nathan and Tiny Atlas Quarterly. I don't think of anything else. Like I think of, like, so when
like I always did my own stuff. And then I was just driven because I was like, I need to pay my bills. I would go to New York. Once you start assisting, you learn so much from assisting. I learned so much from working in a lab. And I would go to New York. Like they was like, oh, you have to go to New York and like meet people. And so I started making my own promos, and I would like cold call people in New York. Like I would go to the magazine, like masthead, find who's the photo editor, call the switchboard, and be like, can I be connected to Kathy Ryan or whatever? And then cold call people and be like, hey, I'm a photographer. I'm going to be coming into town. Can I meet with you? And so then that's how I started getting assignments. And then eventually I was like, okay, if I want to be a photographer, I can't be an assistant anymore. which was like a hard thing to give up. And I know that's a big transition just for being on your own for a lot of people. I remember distinctly there was some shoot that I was doing with Thayer, and I was assisting her, and it was a cool shoot. It was like for some business magazine, and it was at a coffee company. And I was, with Thayer, like rolling around her bag and loading film and stuff. And the PR person was walking us around, and she was like, "What do you do? Just like roll her bag around?" And I was like, "Yeah, kind of." And Thayer was like, no, she does that more. And I was like, but basically, yes. So like, if I want to be a photographer, I can't do this,
Did you like
but
assisting?
anyway, I mean, I did, in that I only worked for a few people, and I had, the people I worked for were good friends, are still good friends. They are still a great friend. Tim Archibald is the other photographer I work for mainly. I don't get to see Tim as much, but he's passionate about photography. He's now like running Academy of Art photo department, I think, which is new for him. But he's always been just like obsessed with photography, so curious. And so most of the time I was like driving to Silicon Valley, right? It was like hours of like driving down to Google, and we talked about photography, and photographers like to talk about photography. So it was a great education in that way. It was kind of frustrating to me because a lot of the time it was like, like Tim, especially at the time, was like, okay, I use a ring light and I do this, and it was just like the same thing, even though, and his process was the same, even though the pictures were different. It just felt like a wedding, I didn't like shooting weddings because they're predictable. Like, even though everyone feels like they're super unique and the actual personal experience is totally unique to those individuals, like it's a script, right? And so that was boring. And then, so I shot editorial, and then I started shooting advertising, and that's a whole other world. Advertising, you also need to make your own work.
Well, it's super competitive. I've found myself, assisting other photographers, and sometimes they've even given me the pep talk of like, hey, like you can't come onto my set and self-promote, and like, it starts to get really fucking weird. But like, I'm not that kind of person anyway. Like, if people who know me in person, like, I love to chat about photography, but I'm also not like the person at the party or on set being like, hey, you know what I do? Look at my work, So the advertising world is a really weird place.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like that's a whole other tangent, but the whole thing of like, if you're working for someone, you shouldn't be promoting yourself on their set, and you shouldn't be like, here's my Instagram, because it's a lot of work and years for whoever to get that. And I think if you're a nice person as a photographer, like, you wouldn't want to say that to an assistant because it sounds super rude, but then a lot of people just take advantage of it. And so like, my position with it is like, if you feel strong enough to promote yourself on my set, like, you should be on your own. And I can promote you. Like, I'm a total promoter of all sorts of photographers. Like, I want to tell the world about people doing great work, but like, you're working for me, you're not promoting yourself on my photo shoot,
Absolutely. 100%. Because we are like our own, whether you want to look at it as our own business or our own what, it's we're our own entity. And like you said, we've worked pretty dang hard to make these relationships. And the way that I've always dealt with something like that is, nothing really has happened in that regards, but if somebody's helping me out, whether they're a peer, like a photographer, or an assistant, sometimes those people just maybe don't work the way that you like to. And I don't know, you just don't ask them back, I guess.
Yeah, that's the easiest way to deal with. I mean, that's the thing, and that's hard. And I mean, speaking of just like the current situation, like all this independence and freedom in this world that we're in is made this entire community completely like vulnerable to having going from income to zero income, which is insane. And like, I don't know, everyone's gonna have to get different jobs or something, but the Tiny Atlas thing, if you want me to get there, or then you can also just switch back to like start at a different point.
Before you jump in, I think it's really interesting that you mentioned that you'll promote other photographers' work, because now the fact that you just said that, I was like, oh yeah, that's like really freaking true. I mean, Tiny Atlas Quarterly is basically a proof of, look, there's so many talented people out there. And
Right.
and in that same regards, you as like the curator of the magazine, let's say, you have to like other people's work. There's some there's a lot of photographers out there who don't like to digest other people's work, or they feel a certain way towards it. And I think you have to be open to appreciating other people's work and being comfortable enough with yourself to say, hey, look at all this great work.
Yeah. Well, I think that's my personality for sure. Like, I mean, that's my way. Like, I am a natural curator, I guess, like just looking at lots of work, being curious about it. I probably could be more like a pretty narrow focus, like there's definitely so much variety in photography now. Like I was thinking about this conversation and thinking about, whose work is inspiring me, or whose work is like sparking joy. And I tried to like pull some stuff, and a lot of the things that actually are like especially fun for me wouldn't be appropriate for Tiny Atlas, because I've like curated Tiny Atlas into a certain space. So like there's people, like there's photographer Teresa Freitas, and she has like these beautiful, like not quite real, like surreal setting. They're sort of travel pictures, but this crazy like high key light and really pale and weird. And then she does, she'll like plant flowers in the ocean. But and there's this woman, Sarah, I looked her up because I didn't know her name. Was it? I took a picture of it so I could remember. Sarah Shaquille, do you know her? She takes pictures, like she makes all these sparkly pictures. I can like put it up here.
Yeah. Oh, cool. Oh, whoops, sorry.
Like, I don't know if you can see that, but there's like everything's covered in sparkles.
Oh, got it. Yeah. I'll drop links too and everything we talk about into the
for later. But so there's work. Brenda Millis runs like the trends at Adobe, and I've known her from the photo editing world for a long time and worked with her on a number of projects for Tiny Atlas. But she's super smart curator, like legit. I feel a little bit like a faux curator, because there's like the photo editors who I admire and people who I have worked for over the years who just know so much more than me. And then I know a lot, and I know a lot about, but sort of this narrow world of travel, as well as like photo history, but like just everything that's going on, that's more of like a real curator's job, to just know everything that's like on trend and new and fancy.
Well, you never want to be the smartest person in the room, like I love having talented friends because they teach me, they show me.
Yeah. And well, just there's so much photography. So you can't, I mean, I guess if you're just like a killer curator, like you could just sort of be on top of everything. That's great. Natasha Lunn, who ran a photo of mine in the New Yorker forever ago, and a Polaroid of mine. I was so proud of myself.
Oh, that's really cool.
Like a million years ago. She runs the photography department at Airbnb magazine. She's a killer photo editor, just like putting out such great work, getting like super creative new people. Obviously, like people at California Sunday magazine, I'm a total fangirl.
Oh yeah, that's I got hard eyes all day for California Sunday.
Yeah, Jackie Bates, like, and crew there is just killing it. So yeah, I mean, I'm consuming
a lot of these things
a lot.
Did you see did you see like a hole maybe in the industry, like, drawing on your own knowledge? And is that where Tiny Atlas came from? Like what sparked you to be like, you know what, I'm going to do my own thing?
Yeah. So the Tiny Atlas foundation story, or whatever, is I had been like an editorial photographer, shot a lot of travel. I've always loved travel, but I made a lot of my money shooting like portraits, but I always loved travel. But travel assignments were kind of just lame. And then once I started shooting advertising, it was on location, real world, like production, and working a lot with Apple, who was my biggest client for a long time. And the photo production team at Apple is like the best in the world. They also spend more money than anyone, or maybe not anymore, but they used to. And not in like a flagrant way, but just like, oh, this is what the appropriate price to pay a stylist is. This is the appropriate number of people to have on the set to do a great job. And so that's how I learned a lot about production for myself, because I got in there through sending them something or whatever. And so then I transitioned away from editorial, but I was doing all this travel, right? But it was all for lifestyle. And so all the photo shoots that you'd see are like families jumping around and stuff like that. which was not what I had sort of wanted to do. But I think I had a natural like disinclination towards cheesiness, which was what Apple liked. Like it looked real enough at the time. So it looked like it could have been my family, which actually later proved quite difficult for me in the advertising world because my work isn't fake enough looking. So while it was good enough for Apple, it's not good enough for Verizon or whatever, because it doesn't feel like fake enough or, you know, high energy enough or whatever. It's like a little slower. It's a little more contemplative.
It's simple. Yeah. It's like more simple.
Even if there's a lot of production, you know, the pictures themselves are more calm,
right.
And whatever. And so the big transition was really when I had Otto. So I had done personal projects and bounced between different jobs and personal projects. And then I had my son in 2011. He just turned 9
Nice.
last week. And then I was home, you know, and I was like breastfeeding and wanted to be there for my son, but also I was like going crazy, right? Like, what am I doing? And so I was like, what's my next shoot? And so I had a friend who was a former assistant, who's a talented photographer, who was living in Montana in near Glacier National Park. And I had always been curious about Glacier, had never been there. And I was like, why don't I do like a test? I'm going to do a test. So people who aren't commercial photographers on here, a test is like where you just sort of produce something that you think should be in your portfolio so that it can be in your portfolio when you go to meet people. And I didn't have my agents. I was with Bernstein and Julie, who were my agents for a long time. And they were just like wanting more people jumping around. So I was like, okay, so I'm going to go to Montana. I'm going to pay to bring a whole crew here and just, you know, I wanted to pay instead of ask people to do it for free because people bail. You know, I'm in California where the land of everyone bails. So people be like, oh, yeah, we'll totally do that for you for trade or for photos. And then they will not come. They will be like, oh, sorry, I had this other thing. So I was like, I didn't pay like a crazy amount, but I paid.
But enough to keep people there. Yeah, that's smart. That makes sense.
Because I was like, I'm not going to like spend all this time putting this together and have my child and like then go to Montana and people are like, all right, I'm not going to come. So I put together this big shoot that was basically an Apple shoot, like, but with a fraction of the budget, which still was like a huge amount of money that I probably shouldn't have spent time. That was just from my own business savings because I had been doing really well with advertising. And I did this big shoot there and I spent all this money. And then I was like, I had all these photos, but it was like, what am I doing with this? Am I just adding like 20 new photos to my portfolio? And that was what all this money was for. And at the time it was like the big blog time. But everything, all the bloggers were just talking about themselves in their lives or their homes or they're renovating their homes or they're doing this, that, and the other. And I was like, I don't want to talk about myself. But in travel, like what I had loved about like editorial was the trips, right? Like I loved traveling, even if it was just to shoot a portrait and I was going to San Antonio or whatever, like then you would learn. But then I wasn't happy with the result of those photos. You know, like I didn't, there's great photo editors. One of my favorite photo editors, Corey Jacobs, who now like makes movies at Cottage 8 in New York. Her husband's also a really talented photographer, but she was like my gold star, you know, like the most amazing, you know, like working with her, I would produce work that I was really proud of. But a lot of people, I was good at being on my own. So people would just like send me, I wouldn't get any art direction. I wouldn't get any help. And then they would edit the photos and it'd be like boring, you know? So I loved to travel, but I didn't like the imagery that was coming out. And then with Apple, we do like these amazing productions in like Australia and Paris and all these places. And we did a lot of research, right? To like figure out where to go, what time to go, where to stay, how to get permits. And we brought incredible teams. And like those teams weren't credited. I wasn't credited. The hotels weren't anywhere. And there wasn't a place for that. You know, in travel magazines, there's the cover shoot where people spent money. The rest was shitty stock or like just not very curated. And then there's the advertising where you spend a lot of money, but none of those travel resources were shared. And so I felt like there was just this disconnect with like the type of imagery I wanted to see and the type of imagery like that I wanted to put in my portfolio. So like when you come back from a shoot, even if it doesn't come out that great in San Antonio, which actually I don't know if I've been to San Antonio, you pick the few pictures from your portfolio that you really love, and those are the ones that end up in your portfolio. So the idea with my Tiny Atlas was to with Tiny Atlas was to create a place where I could put the photographer favorites. And at first it was just me, but I didn't want it to have my name, so I had Tiny Atlas. And then photographers, I had a photography community, and Lou Mora, actually, who's that surf shooter who now lives in Ojai and is like a car shooter. He had assisted for me once and sort of was watching what I was doing, and he was like, "Hey, can I be in your magazine?" And I was like, "Okay." And then there was a question like, "Oh, can you have other photographers in what is supposed to be basically your self-promo piece?" And I was like, "Well, if it's a magazine to some extent, like, it can't be just me. There's no way my voice is enough for like a whole magazine." And so I opened it up, and I opened it up to other photographers, but I didn't have any money, and I wasn't that focused on the money because I was funding it and my husband was programming it and whatever. And so I only wanted really good work. And so it wasn't a place for people who were emerging in terms of just their practice. Like, maybe they hadn't made a lot of money, but anyone who was in there had a great website. Their work was really solid. And I started the Instagram early, but the Instagram was the big transition because we had a lot of people in the magazine, but it was the small group of fancy photographers. And then and then the idea with my Tiny Atlas was there's a lot of people who can take a beautiful travel photo, but I don't have to like link to their whole portfolio. Or if it's on Instagram, I don't care. Like, if it's not on the website and I don't have to like directly link to their website and agree with everything that's on their website,
Yeah.
like basically endorse their whole website, I could just be like, this picture is great. But of course, like, I always wanted to credit them. And so I came up with the tag during our Kickstarter, and then that really exploded the audience of Tiny Atlas. And
Big
then
time.
it's just changed like a million times since then.
Yeah, well, I'm also it's it was like the perfect storm of everything happening. Print is awesome, and the magazine is incredible, but also so is like I remember like when the hashtag was about to like hit 1 million or something like that. Like, that's like unbelievable. Like when I want to travel somewhere, like I'm going to go to like what I see there, and you have covered like the globe. So it's like, it's a really interesting way to see things. And also, like you said, you may be doing these amazing shoots for X, Y, and Z client, and you're doing all the location scouting and all the planning and all the places, but like, why shouldn't people have access to that kind of thing too? When I'm going to go somewhere and I know a friend's been, I hit them up and I'm like, "Hey, what did you see? What did you do?" This is a great way where people can almost find that information on their own.
Well, right. Well, that's the other part. Like, people would always ask me, because I traveled a lot for work, like, "Emily, where do you go?" And so I was like, "Here, I'll make up a magazine." But then people still ask me, and I'm like, "Dude, I made up a whole magazine. Like, go look at the magazine." I should just like make PDFs or something, but or just like a list of things. But
Yeah. No, it's a convenient thing for you, but it's also, sometimes it's fun to like find something on your own kind of too. But that's like a great kind of segue here, because travel photography is awesome, and it's beautiful, and it can, inspire you to go somewhere. And like, has there been like any travel faux pas or mistakes that maybe you thought were kind of maybe a detriment, but turned out to be kind of awesome? Because part of the journey in travel is, part of the appeal in travel is the journey, so has there been anything that you maybe thought like wouldn't work out, or maybe did? Or
I think a lot of people expect everything to go according to plan, but anyone who travels a lot will tell you that that is not the case, and that you should not expect that. So I actually, like, right before this got insane, I had some post about how, like, I had just come back from Brazil, and I had Lindsay Shea is a talented photographer who works for me on some projects with Tiny Atlas and over the past couple of years. And I go on these big trips, and as a parent, it's always a little bit scary, because I'm just like, hopefully everything's gonna be fine if I'm away. And but then, like, I would I'll time things down to like, okay, well, I'm going to get in and I'm not going to check my bag. And then it's going to take me 25 minutes to get home. So I'm going to like actually get home early enough to say goodnight to Otto, like planning stuff in that way. But it always has felt kind of like false to me, like, because there's so much unknown, because I traveled a lot by myself in South America and stuff like that. Like that was how I grew up traveling. And so this idea of like in the pre-COVID world where you could just like nail everything down to the last minute and have everything go how you want is just like doesn't jive with me as like reality. But so like Lindsay, I'd be like, okay, well, I'm gonna go and then hopefully I'll see you later. And she'd be like, what are you talking about? Like, I'll see you on Tuesday at 11, like everything's fine. And I had like 8 flights to do before I would see her, and so there's this element of sort of the unknown and fear, but she's just like, yeah, everything's gonna go how you expect it, even though she's a traveler. So I she's like a crazy like backpacker, but there's this idea in the past that like, oh, well, if you take flights in general, like everything works out. But I don't really like fundamentally believe that. So that helps when things go wrong. Like if you're not expecting everything to go right, there are certain things that just drive me crazy. Like I have a thing with like rental cars, and I just like hate the whole process of rental cars. I feel like no matter what I do, it costs $100 a day, and I hate them for it. And it's always like slower than you want, unless it's like Hertz Gold, and then you pay $120 a day. But yeah, so I have my certain things that drive me crazy. I do think that you have to like be okay with things not going well. That was another thing with Tiny Atlas. Like in editorial and advertising photography, it's always sunny. Like it's always beautiful in general, unless there's like an ad about it raining, but then they probably make the rain, to control it. And Tiny Atlas is like, when we got to Montana on that first shoot, there was like a crazy stormy day, and I'd rented a fancy boat and we're out on this lake, but like it was beautiful. Like there was a crazy storm on the lake, but like the clouds were dark and the color of the light was insane. And I was like, I could put this in my magazine because it's mine, and like, nobody can tell me not to.
Yeah.
So I think that has been like the reality element, even though Tiny Atlas is quite like beautiful, and obviously not everyone has access to traveling, and now no one can travel, but it's aspirational in the sense that it's very expensive and privileged to be able to travel, but the pictures have this strong sense of reality, which is, I feel like, what has been a big defining place for the imagery in that community. Is like, it's not travel and leisure like by design. Like it's not like Condé Nast Traveler, and which like copied Tiny Atlas, but still like there's this there's this disconnect between the sort of fake photos that Instagram big travel communities present and what it actually feels like to be there. And that was sort of always the language of Tiny Atlas, is like how it feels to be there, what it's really like, what it really looks like from a real person's perspective.
I love that. Yeah, I love that. And I like that you touched on Instagram a little bit. Just from seeing your story this morning, I thought that was interesting. That was like a cool kind of like maybe case study. Like I went immediately to my travel page and I sent you the screenshot, and I was like, oh wow, this doesn't look like travel to me. It's like it's a lot of like the feed on my page is like women and pillows, and like I don't know.
I mean, I've been trolling Instagram, and I actually know some people who work there, and I like sent them that thing and was like, check this out. I wrote a big piece on it last year for Artsy that was like why the influencer photos were annoying or whatever. But the actual just definition, like that they would have like a field in their Explore that's like home, decor, this, and then travel. And then the travel is a bunch of women wearing pillows and selfies of people's boobs. Like Instagram, if you're making yourself an editor by creating categories, and then like they're categorizing these things, and like it's not travel, it's like it's just wrong. So I'm trying to troll them to fix it.
Yeah, no, I like that. I like that you have the gusto to do that too. I think that's awesome, and somebody, I mean, has to say something. And do you think that means like a curator has to step in, or like I'm sure they must have, like I don't know the inner workings,
Yeah, I don't know that much about what goes on there. They have huge teams that curate, and that then there's obviously a lot of algorithm stuff that goes in there. but you can see like the real transparency of like these platforms who are like, oh, it's all just done by sort of the algorithm based on majority of sentiment or whatever. But like when Twitter decided that like COVID-19 was truly a problem, then they like miraculously filtered out like tons of disinformation immediately. Like they made a choice and told the world that they were making a choice. And like Facebook, which is like, oh, we're just like, it's out of our hands, it's just the internet, Then like COVID-19, like you search something and they give you like just facts, like, and Google, same thing. Like instead of just getting some whatever surgical masks with boobs on them, like if you search right now on COVID-19 on Google, you get like graphs that are coming from daily data from medical institutions to give you straight news, So all of these major players in the platform world that are saying like, oh, well, we don't have a say, we're not capable of it, or we're not making decisions. Like they are making decisions all the time, and they're making decisions for whatever metrics they're making decisions for. But I'm just personally trolling them on travel because I think they have it wrong. And I'm just grappling with the idea of like, well, maybe they have it right because most of the people who think of travel think that that's what travel is. But I really just, after getting all those responses again this morning, I'm like, I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. It's like the internet and this connectivity, I don't know really what to call. Like, years ago it was easier to call it the internet, but now it's like social media and like that, the whole conglomerate of like our digitally connected lives is really interesting. Just for an example, like a really positive thing is this conversation right now. We can't be together, but we can have a conversation, and we can invite like a bunch of people here, to be with us and see these things and chat and weigh in. But
I think it's interesting that it's happening over Zoom. And I think, people have been wanting new platforms, and then obviously Zoom has become one of the platforms of choice during this time of isolation. Obviously, like that whole conversation I was having on Instagram, I'm having on Instagram because Instagram has provided me with that tool to connect with so many photographers. Instagram made Tiny Atlas a reality, even though we were never like a suggested user. I feel like I fought tooth and nail for every follower that we have. But still, like, we have that platform and it's free and available 24 hours a day, every day. And that's because Instagram built it. But is that enough? Like at some point you have to take, as the platform, some responsibility for some of the things. And maybe you don't. If you're like, okay, we don't take responsibility, then eventually there is a new platform. There is like a Zoom community, or the new version of Zoom that is Zoom meets Instagram, and people go there who are sick of Instagram, and it explodes. And
yeah. Well, are we putting too much weight, or, as artists and creatives, are we putting too much weight on social media to carry our work, because like,
I mean, when people complain about it, I think, yeah, I mean, it is such an amazing free tool. Like it used to be when we would make promos, like you would have a designer that you would pay, or like in my case, I was married to one, my sister was one, and I would ask them to like help me make a printed promo. They would design it, and then I would print it, and go to the press checks in San Francisco, spend hundreds, thousands of dollars, and then mailing them to people. And then you don't know if they're thrown out or whatever. And now I could tell you every single person who engaged with me personally or with Tiny Atlas today, and if your message is being reached or not. And I mean, that is an incredible tool and nothing to complain about. If you're like, oh, my work's not getting seen, it's not getting seen because I don't know, like it's not just because of the algorithm, it's not getting seen because maybe you're not like putting out work regularly, and that's what the platform,
yeah. Well, putting your let's say like putting Tiny Atlas out there, or putting, whether that's Instagram or the magazine, you're influencing people. A lot of people look up to you in the magazine to see where maybe they should go or what they should be doing. How does that make you feel? And do you ever consider something like that?
Yeah, I mean, I do. Right now, my first reaction with COVID was to flee. Like, I was like, I do not want to be stuck You know, like I
Wow.
love my house. I travel and then I'm home for a few weeks and then I'm gone. Might just be for a couple days. But like that going away and coming back is a big part of my life and my happiness to some extent. And so the idea of just being stuck here, like after 2-3 weeks, still being stuck here and not being able to like go to the beach even for a day, you know, but I was like, well, one, like we had like a spring break trip that was just in Bolinas that was planned, and the people canceled on us before it then became illegal to like rent property. You know, there's like, you can't rent a property in Marin right now. So like not even going across the bay, which I feel like is a little too much. But as we were thinking about it, it was like, well, could I go somewhere like anyway? Because I would have to basically just not post anything about myself for that time, because I would be responsible to being, you know, to saying like, oh, well, if other people are supposed to stay home, but I'm fleeing, you know, like I get to go, like I get a hard pass. I mean, I think if when California opens back up and other places, like I would follow the rules. So like I'm dying to go just be in Hawaii for the summer. And when Hawaii decides they're allowing people to go there, like I would go and quarantine and then coming home. And my parents are older and it's like very scary for them. And so like if I go to Hawaii and then fly back, you know, if I, you know, then I would be really careful for on the return and stuff like that. But yeah, I don't feel like capable of like just doing whatever I want because people are looking, and people do look like, just percentage wise, like my feed is obviously much smaller than Tiny Atlas, but I think the way Instagram has, you know, rejiggered the algorithm to have you see posts from people you know more than brands. So Tiny Atlas is officially like a business account. And so like my personal Instagram story has much higher percentage views than Tiny Atlas.
Oh, interesting. I wonder,
And
because mine's a business account. I wonder if I should change mine back. I don't know. Like I try not to
I
think
don't know
too
if
much
you
about
changed
it.
it,
Like,
if you can change it back. I think I did it because I waited for a really long time because I believed that it would just tank everything. And in fact, it really didn't. But I was very scared that it would tank our engagement. But then I needed statistics to like
right.
tell people
Yeah,
what was going on.
it
And
helps.
so
Yeah.
I turned it on. But
Right.
and then they made it so you don't need to turn it on to have the statistics. But yeah, I don't think it really matters that much. What matters is just if the algorithm thinks the content that you're producing, like if you have like pictures of yourself wearing a pillow, like right now, you're gonna
Apparently that's viral, you know,
be
like
like right at the front of the Explore page. I mean, I don't usually look at the Explore page, so I don't even know why that's my whole trolling thing. But sometimes I'm just like curious, you know, as a curator, like what's going on in the world, and so I just want to see. And I'm just always like so disappointed. So
yeah, I hear you. So I want to open it up to questions. If anybody's got any questions for Emily, you're more than welcome to type in the chat and shout them out. I got a couple questions from you guys before, and I think we've covered that stuff. Oh, well, here's one we didn't talk about necessarily. Where do you think Tiny Atlas is going in the future, Emily? What do you think you want it to become, or what do you see it becoming?
no, I don't know. Tiny House is like major failure. It's funny. I'm so good at looking at other people's businesses actually and just being like, this is what you need to do. And this is what's wrong, even as photographers or like new businesses. And Tiny Atlas has been like just kind of a failure. I feel like from the beginning in terms of like what it is as a business has not been clear. Financially, it has not been successful. Like there's a lot of things. Like the reason it lives is because people like the content. People like it. And I am a community person. We have created a genuine community. So because of that community, because people like the content, it's there. But like for lots of business reasons, it should not exist anymore. That was my plan actually for my plan for the summer was to sort of like rethink what's going on. Like we have another book coming out next year, which I've already turned in a rough draft of, and I have like the journal coming out. So we are continuing to do publishing. We're continuing to do trips. I've been more focused on my work as an advertising photographer because realistically, like that, I make so much more money for both my family and for Tiny Atlas because Tiny Atlas is the beneficiary of whatever I make. as an advertising photographer. So I've been like talking with some big brands and stuff like that again about like getting going on the large production photo shoots. So I think there's going to be potentially a little bit of a shift back there, just because it makes financial sense.
Right.
And I'm good at it. It makes me happy. I love working on a big shoot with art director, like all of that stuff. And like whenever I'm on a normal shoot and I have a digital tech and assistants, I'm just like so grateful, you know, because I do so much scrappy stuff with Tiny Atlas. Like when I get back to a normal set and people are like, what kind of chai do you want? What milk do you want in your chai? And like, here's your digital tech and here's all your files output. And I'm just like, want to cry. Like, I'm so happy to be back in that world that's familiar to me. So I definitely want to like rejigger the percentages of my time to include that and be grateful and acknowledge the fact that like, yes, I have been doing this for 20 something years. I have a lot to offer the commercial world. And then I have a lot of information as well as like this sort of human computer of like what is going on with travel and stuff like that. So I've tried to like, a lot more of the requests that I'm fielding for advertising are big global shoots that involve travel. And I'm super grateful for that because that's not what I was being asked to do before. It was more just like healthcare and regular lifestyle, technology lifestyle. And now it's more like, you know, travel, lifestyle stuff, which is more what I'm just personally interested in. And then for Tiny Atlas, I think like, I really love the community element. I love putting out shows. I love putting out books. And I love promoting other people's work and meeting people all over the world. And so I want to like continue to do that, but also I'm talking actually with some other parties about potentially like getting representation for Tiny Atlas so that when, you know, like a big agent receives a call about trying to do some sort of global project, but the budget is not the right budget for that, and they can't like send people all over the world, like how could Tiny Atlas, like how could they leverage the Tiny Atlas network to, you know, break up that big, you know, the big fee into, instead of one photographer getting the fees, having 20 photographers get that same fee, and the production is lower, but you know, it's more of like a real vibe. So we've done a lot of sort of micro agency type of work for clients, like the shoot when we were, you know, in Tofino and Tahiti, we're doing a project for Adobe and for Fuji. Yeah. But trying to do that in a way that's more targeted and sending the message out to people. I did, you know, to plug this new thing that I started, you know, once I knew that we were going to be locked down and all the photographers that I know are basically going to lose their work. I wanted to, you know, I started talking to people, and I have a friend who's not even a photographer. Lots of people who are not even photographers. She's in Bogota and she's got 2 kids, and she literally cannot leave her house with the 2 kids. And it's been like 28 days or whatever. And her and someone else who was like a contributor to Tiny Atlas sent me a picture, and she was in Jordan at food. And I was like, oh, I'm promoting, like talking about restaurants where you can get takeout. Can you get takeout in Amman still from this great looking restaurant? And she's like, oh no, like we can't leave our house. If we do, we get put in jail for a year. And I was like, oh, this is very different than my personal experience. And so wanting to use that network of people to show what we're all experiencing, because Tiny Atlas has always been very much about like what's actually happening. And I felt like as the transition to COVID happened, there are all these travel communities that were just like, oh, like this is what we're going to do when it's over. And I was like, yeah, that's cool. But right now, like I don't have a lot of bandwidth for like dreaming about travel. Like I have bandwidth to like focus on what's going on.
Yeah. Well, that ties into like kind of Kate's question here, and is asking, you know, as a curator, do you think the travel industry will come back out of the chaos of all this, and will it bounce back with advertising or see a slow crawl?
I think it's so dependent on both therapeutics and vaccine. You know, like if somebody develops like a therapeutic drug that however much it costs, like it works and you can give people 3 days of medicine and then they're okay, so then the hospitals aren't swarmed, then that could bring it back pretty quickly. And then once there's a vaccine that is widely available, it will come back. But until that time, I mean, it's fucking, it's really sketchy. And I think everyone in travel is definitely focused on like local travel, sustainable, what people can do. I mean, airlines, I think you're actually relatively like, they have the good filters in the planes, and there's like no one on the planes now, and how to protect yourself on an airplane, for the most part. So I'm not that scared to fly, but I know a lot of people will be very scared to fly. And yeah, I mean, just like if you're bringing that to another community, like those communities like Hawaii, they're totally dependent on tourism for their economy. I guess they don't need to if they shift their economy, but right now they can't have anyone there. And so like, how do they open it up? Because it's so easy, especially since there's asymptomatic spreading.
Yeah,
Like,
it's going to be weird for a while. It's going to be really strange, especially travel wise.
I think there's a lot of coordination, and like between scientists, like the coordination is incredible, and they're sharing all this information, and we have all the tools of a connected world to help get us out of this. But until there's like real fixes to it, it's very dangerous. So it is gonna really mess up travel for a long time. And I think the whole Zoom thing has proven, somebody was telling me, I can't remember who I was talking to yesterday, but they were like, it's proven that like most of business travel is not necessary. Like there are times where it's necessary, but a lot of it is not, and it's very expensive. And so I think it's going to really mess up business travel as well.
Yeah, maybe a good thing. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, for the planes and the environment and global warming and stuff like that. So
cool. Well, thanks for hanging out. If anybody have any other questions, don't be shy. This is the time. Daria just chimed in here too and saying that she'd love it if Tiny Atlas Quarterly kind of moved in an agency-like manner. And I agree with that. That was a thought I had while we were talking. I was like, man, it's almost like you could almost branch out into representing or being an agency, or I think there's a couple different avenues there for you.
Well, we are doing that to some extent, and we've been doing that, like we sort of tested that last year, and then we're continuing sort of this year in the travel space, like specifically in the travel space.
I love that.
But I didn't want to do it for everything, but I'm talking with an agent about it for just like a wider thing right now, because the world travel just died. So
yeah, I hear you. Cool. Sweet. All right. Well, thanks, Emily. I really appreciate you being here. I'm really grateful that you allowed me and everybody else to pick your brain, and I always appreciate your insight.
Thanks so much.
Cool.
Bye.
Yeah. Bye-bye.